Hello, whatever time you're watching and wherever you are, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Little bit of housekeeping. I didn't do a video yesterday. I'm really sorry. I needed recovery time from a fall earlier on in the week. I am bruised and battered, but I'm okay. Hashtag EDS life. Just quickly, please hit the like, please hit subscribe, comment down below. All of that really helps with the algorithm and I really, really appreciate it. So I'm going to do a quick recap, or as quick as I can, on day 5 and day 6 of testimony. I'm condensing about 16 hours of stuff into a short video if I can. So if there's anything that isn't clear, let me know. We heard from Britt Dove, the forensics guy, on cross-examination. The big takeaways were Maggie's phone and Alex's phone did not move at the same time. The steps that they went on and on about being recorded aren't 100% accurate. Distance is even less accurate than the steps. We finally got to the bottom of why we keep hearing about Faraday bags. The GPS location data on Maggie's phone was overwritten. When the phone was found, they used the passcode to open it to check that it was definitely Maggie's phone. They closed the phone and handed it over to it got passed up the chain to Britt Dove. It wasn't put in a Faraday bag, so all of the GPS data was lost and it was overwritten with it being in the hands of law enforcement, especially since it took 8 days for that phone to be processed. The passcode wasn't passed on to Britt Dove for him to be able to open the phone for 8 days. So there's no way to confirm where Maggie's phone was or was not. The defense did a great job of joining those dots. The prosecution, not so much. They just baffled us all with data, times, and kind of step count, and when the phone changed from portrait to landscape and all of that stuff. And it was well over 12 hours before they found the phone, between roughly where we think the time of death is, because we still haven't heard about that, and when the phone was found. So who knows what data could have been retrieved if they had done their job right. We then heard from a chap called Nathan Brian Varnado, who works for Colleton County Sheriff's Office. He knew Alex Murdaugh through a previous trial that Alex had prosecuted. He was brought in as an expert witness to translate gang slang for the jury. He had nothing to do with the investigation or anything else like that, but he has the expertise to be able to say, yeah, this is what they were saying. So they knew each other by name. Alex recognized him and vice versa. He was brought in the night of the crimes to administer a GSR kit. Alex understood what he was there for. He understood he was there to do a job and complied completely. He said he was asked if Alex's hands were shaking, and he said no, but on cross-examination he admitted that he was visibly shaken up, as you would expect someone having gone through a trauma would be. He said that Alex Murdaugh was clean, there was no blood on his shoes or clothes or hands, but he also said that he was only really paying attention to his face and his hands because he was there to do a job and explain what that job was. We heard from the best witness so far, which is Rogan Gibson. Rogan was friends with Paul from the age of 11 or 12 all the way through. They were close friends. Rogan adopted the Murdaughs as a second family, and they adopted him as another son. He had free reign to go up to the Moselle property where the crimes were committed, and, you know, hunt and do what he wanted. It was an open house to him and a lot of Buster and Paul's friends. He testified to the fact that he spoke to Paul on the 7th, the day of the unalivings. He says that Paul contacted him about a dog named Cash, which belongs to Rogan, who was kennelled at the Moselle property. Paul said that he thought something might be wrong with the tail. So they agreed to do a FaceTime call. And if that didn't work, because signal up there is spotty at best, that Paul would take a video and send it to him. They tried the FaceTime call, but the video was laggy. It was very difficult to decipher anything. And it was only an 11-second call. But on that call, he has testified that he is sure that he heard Alex Murdaugh's voice on there. Him, Maggie and Paul. No one seemed to be distressed or upset, but he was sure he heard that. He did then doubt himself afterwards. It turns out Paul did take that video, it just never got sent. That could be because Paul's phone was on very low battery. We know that it was on about 2% battery around the time of that period of time between kind of 7:30 and 10:30 when it turned off because the battery had died. He was shown that video after the fact, and he has testified that he's 100% sure that Alex Murdaugh's voice is on that video. He didn't see him, but he is sure he heard the voice, but everyone sounded relaxed and normal. This harms Alex Murdaugh's alibi. He says he never went down to the kennels. Is that kind of definitive of anything? No, because it's easy to explain that. Memory is faulty. We all have faulty memories, especially when there is a trauma involved. Also, if you're out and about on your property, you get confused over days. I fell over on Tuesday and had to think really hard over what day that was. So, and that's not really, it wasn't very nice, but it wasn't a traumatic event. Alex Murdaugh was visibly distressed at that video. We're looking at the final, or hearing the final things that were recorded from his family members who are no longer with us. The witness was also visibly very upset about it. The witness is really credible. Rogan is credible. He sounds honest and genuine. He testified that Paul and Alex Murdaugh had a great relationship, that they were very close, that they were loyal to each other, they were supportive. Nothing happened in Paul's life without him talking to Alec about it. That the home was open at all properties, wherever they were. Friends of Buster and Paul were welcome. It was an open door policy. You could just turn up. He didn't take the threats to Paul seriously because as far as he was aware, it wasn't by phone or email or anything else like that. People weren't turning up at the house, but when they were out and about, people were making comments or, being nasty about the boating accident. But he really didn't take those seriously. He testified that Paul was a bit lax with security. He would often leave guns lying around. There was a friend that moved out of their home, and as they were clearing things out to move, found one of Paul's guns in their closet, which just is surreal to me, but apparently that was normal for Paul. He left cars unlocked. He went to a party and left his truck unlocked, and that's how his gun was stolen. He would leave sheds and workshops, the hunting cabin unlocked, and he would leave guns in those places. He testified that there are no cameras, that it's really easy to get on the property without anyone noticing, and it would be really easy for stuff to be stolen. He had no recollection of the replacement gun, but we've already had testimony to say that the gun was replaced. In the days after the murders, he said that when discussing things, that final video, that final FaceTime call, he said he heard Paul, Maggie, and Alex down at the kennels, and nothing seemed amiss, and all of this stuff. And he did that in front of Alex Murdaugh, and Alex Murdaugh didn't push back. Now, cross-examination then said to him, how was Alex's demeanor in those days afterwards? And he admitted he was distraught for days. He wasn't holding it together, which you'd expect from someone who is grieving their wife and their son. The prosecution then did something very, very risky. And they said to him, knowing all you know now, can you really say that you knew Alex Murdaugh? Because he had testified that he knew this man. He was a second father. He spent lots of time with them. He knew these people. And the prosecution is saying to him, can you really say that? Can you say you knew the real Alex Murdaugh? And he said, yeah, I did. And the prosecution kind of snottily turned away and went, but you don't, do you? You didn't know him. And he said again, yes, I did. The defense then did something risky again and said to him, can you think of any reason at all why Alex Murdaugh would do this, would kill Maggie and Paul? And he said no, a very definitive no. It was risky, because if he had said, yes, now I know about the fraud, that would have opened that door. We then heard from Will Loving, another friend of Paul's. They've been friends since Will was 15 and Paul was 13. They met at the beach. They both had beach houses down there. They got to know each other. They got closer when Paul was 19 and Will was 21. And Will confirmed the same thing as Rogan, that yes, Paul was very lax with security, that it was a loving family, that he saw nothing amiss. This was a family at harmony, that Paul and Alec were very close. He said that Alec could barely talk in the days after Maggie and Paul died. He'd start a sentence and break down. All he could do was bear hug people and try and comfort them and get comfort from others. At this point, the prosecution tried to submit the fraud by asking Will if he knew that Alec was confronted that day at the firm he worked for about the fraud. Now, it was underhand. It was improper, I think, because it's talking about facts not in evidence. And facts surrounding other alleged crimes, which the judge hasn't ruled on whether that's allowed or not. The judge put the court in recess, heard arguments one way or the other, and said that they would talk about it in the morning. Day 6, the judge ruled that financial crimes could be admissible if there was a direct link, if they could link it straight away to motive for the murders. The defense said, look, the door wasn't opened in talking about relationships and asking these people who knew Alex Murdaugh and the full family really well if they could ever conceive of Alec doing this. So there was some back and forth. The judge, we think, made an error, misspoke, and there's a few LawTube lawyers that have said this, that he was confusing Rule 403 and 404. 403 is about exempting evidence, and 404 is about admitting evidence. And he was saying 403. We think he meant 404. But what that really means is this could be grounds for appeal. The problem is, as Kurt has said many, many times, appeals are for losers, and the overturn rate at appeal is something like 2%. It's really, really low. We then heard the judge say, look, we'll hear more evidence without the jury and we'll decide on whether those financial crimes are admissible. We then heard from Heidi Galore, who works for Snap Inc. She responds to legal processes, subpoenas, search warrants. She testified that you can save a video to memories on Snapchat so it stays there. And that's what happened with this Snapchat video that has been spoken about. It was saved to Snapchat memories at 7:39 and then sent out as a Snapchat at 7:56 p.m. So 17 minutes later. There's nothing to say that that video wasn't taken on the phone and then uploaded to memories. That hasn't been determined. So that video could have been from 3 o'clock that afternoon or several days before and then uploaded to Snapchat. We still have to hear about that. So it could damage Alex Murdaugh's alibi, but it's also easily explained because memories are faulty. The jury were dismissed and sent to the jury room for an extended break. We heard from Jeannie Seckinger, the CFO of what the company that Alex worked for, was a partner for. That company essentially has been disbanded and they've started again under a different name since the fraud. She testified she was very honest and she was obviously really annoyed and let down by Alex. She had known him since high school and worked kind of with him as a colleague for 23 years, only to find out that this fraud had been going on for over a decade. It turns out Alec had started a company bank account under the name of Forge. The company he worked for did dealings with a company called Forge. And what he was doing is having checks made out to his fake Forge so that he could utilize the money. Over the span of that 10 years, it was about £10 million. There's 106 counts of fraud. Alex has confessed to some of that. We don't know just how much. She testified that Alex was confronted that day. It wasn't the first time he had been confronted about funny dealings, and every time he had been confronted, he had paid it back, explained it away as an error, paid it in, and it wasn't an issue. It is a strong case for fraud, but the prosecution haven't tied this to anything. They've not tried to say it's a stressor, that's what turned him into a family annihilator, whatever else. There is nothing to tie the fraud to the murder case, which they're missing a trick. If there's a tie in there, tie it in. Tell the judge and us as pretend jurors what that is. The jury came back in and we heard from Dylan Hightower, who works for the prosecutor's office. He's a prosecutor's investigator. He went out the day after the murders. He testified that the property had been cleared and was no longer a crime scene. Now, quick sidebar on this one. Over here, that's unheard of. Processing a double homicide scene on a 1,700-acre property with buildings, with outbuildings and sheds and kennels, with all of those vehicles that could have evidence, all of those guns that could have evidence, and the house that could have evidence, clearing that in under 24 hours. He went out the following morning. I cannot wrap my head around that, because that is a lot of space to make sure you have processed fully. And we know that that's not the case. They didn't process anything fully. They didn't pick up any spent bullets for testing or anything else like that. He spoke to the family. He went out to assess the two driveways and to take pictures of those. He spoke to the family, and with their help, they worked out that Buster had Find My iPhone for Maggie's phone on his. They tracked Maggie's phone and found it about 35 feet off of the road. in the opposite direction to where Alex said he went to go and see his mother. They didn't take any measurements. They put down a couple of flags and took a couple of photographs, but really, there was no forensic etiquette there. They then called in someone else to come and collect the phone, and once the phone was collected, Dylan Hightower then extracted data from Alex Murdaugh's phone with his consent there and then. We heard from Katie McAllister, who works for SLED. She was called out to collect Maggie's phone. She went to the location. She gloved up, excellent, picked up the phone and was given the passcode to the phone to check whether that was definitely Maggie's phone. The passcode worked, so she locked it, handed it over to someone else for processing. Now, she then went to search the home. She had a search warrant, but there were about 20 to 25 people there, and she didn't want to distress them by kicking them out. They were already pretty distressed. So she gained consent and went in looking for weapons and ammo and any other evidence. And apparently she processed every other room in the house. She went in, she was guided around by Alex Murdaugh's brother and an attorney friend. She testified that she found no weapons or ammo in bathtubs. Where else would you keep those things? That she saw no physical evidence of that would concern or need collecting. They didn't swab the drains. They didn't swab the floors. They didn't take all clothes in plain sight. They didn't go through the washing machine or anything else like that. So great job again, SLED. It just, and yet this is a crime scene that is now open and people can go wherever they want because we've done our job after less than a day. The jury was dismissed, and we then heard from Michael Gunn testifying that his company, The Real Forge, had no files associated with the fraud. He had one, but it was an old file that had been closed off because nothing happened with it. We know all of this because of the chief financial officer. The defense said that we are not disputing any of this evidence for the purpose of this trial. What we're saying is it is not relevant. The defense confirmed that Maggie and Paul and Alex Murdaugh had no insurance policies with this company, that Maggie and Paul were not named in anything, that Alex Murdaugh was not trying to hide money in their names through The Real Forge. So I don't really know how much that got us. We then heard from Chris Wilson. Now, this was heartbreaking. He is a personal injury and malpractice lawyer. He had been good friends with Alex Murdaugh for decades. He saw Alex as one of his best friends. He is obviously devastated by the betrayal of the fraud. He was really close with him, really close with the family for decades. They worked together on various cases, and he was asked how he felt about their friendship now, that he had described Alex Murdaugh as one of his closest friends. How did he feel about it now? And his voice cracked as he said, "I don't know what to feel." And it was heartbreaking. I feel for this guy because Alex Murdaugh dragged him into the fraud. They worked a case together. It was a really big case. The settlement was $5.5 million. Alex was meant to get $792,000 as his fee or for the company. Chris Wilson and his company were going to get $791,000. There was another lawyer whose fees were slightly higher than both of those. Alex said to him, "Look, I want to restructure fees, so all of the money can be paid to me. It'll go in trust, and I'll restructure fees, and then we'll distribute it from there." All of the money was paid to Alex. this Chris Wilson had no reason not to believe what Alex was saying, and that he didn't have authority to do this with his company, or not to trust him as a friend. And it tied him to the fraud. Now, should he have seen the red flags? Maybe. But how many of us have been duped by friends? Not for $5.5 million of settlement, but we've all wanted to trust someone in our lives and then been let down by them. This is just on a grander scale. So, like, honestly, he is heartbroken. He found out that something was amiss on June 2nd. His paralegal had received a couple of emails from these clients asking where the settlement was. One of them on June 2nd was then forwarded on to Chris Wilson. He then chased it up and was told the money was dispersed in March, and left it in Alex Murdaugh's hands, knew nothing about it. Nothing was untoward until September. That's 3 months after the murders and half a year after the money was meant to be dispersed. I don't see that as motive for the murders. Alex Murdaugh didn't get confronted. He got confronted the day of the murders by the firm, but the full scope of the fraud didn't come out until September, which is after the murders. Alex Murdaugh showed genuine sadness and remorse when Chris Wilson was talking. No one in the court was someone who mattered. His family had left because it was the end of the day. The jury wasn't in the room. There was no one to act for. And he cried at one point. He was ashamed. He looked ashamed of himself. So I just don't think someone would act that way if they didn't feel that way. And I want to give a shout out to Abby in the chat. She's watched some of my videos, but she's so intelligent, and she says stuff that you kind of go, oh, hadn't thought of that, because this is real life. And she said, if Alex didn't commit the murders, this must be terrible for him. Not only is he having to sit through testimony and graphic detail about how his loved ones died, seeing photos and video and body cam footage, and hearing people bad mouth him in relation to this, let alone being in prison and already serving time for something he didn't do. Given that he's admitted to the financial stuff, that's, that was a wake-up call for me. Thank you, Abby. I had been thinking along those lines, but slightly different, and that was a kick in the pants. So thank you, Abby, for that. Chris Wilson ended up putting $192,000 of his own money into the account to cover the shortfall for these clients. Nothing else was said until the 3rd of September, when another partner from Alex's firm contacted him and said, look, I don't have long to talk. Have you got this money? He said yes. And this lead guy asked for it to be transferred because there was this massive fraud and they were trying to get the clients their money. And shout out to this firm, because they did pay everyone every penny of what they were owed. So, which is something that is very rare. They could have quite easily gone, I'm really sorry, the money's gone. We were defrauded, you were defrauded, we're really sorry. But they didn't. They paid every single one of the victims of the fraud. Alex Murdaugh said to Chris Wilson, look, I've got money coming from Dad's estate and from Maggie's estate. I will pay you back for that. Accounting error, lie. On the 17th of August, so just over 2 months after the murders, Chris Wilson made Alec write out essentially an acceptance of that debt, an IOU for $192,000 to be paid within 60 days, and got him to sign and date and everything else. He thought Alex might unalive himself, and if that happened, he wouldn't have a leg to stand on when claiming against the estate, and he wanted to cover himself. It's cold to think that way if you think a friend is, in danger of harming themselves, but it is understandable. He has been messed over and dragged into what could be a nefarious thing. He didn't know for sure in August, but he tried to contact Alex Murdaugh on and after the 3rd of September to discuss this fraud that he had been made aware of. He met with Alex, and Alex confessed everything. He confessed everything, that he had an opioid addiction, that this money had gone, he had spent it on his opioids. He obviously has a fair tolerance after 20 years of abusing that. He cried, he showed remorse. He said he would make sure Chris had the money back. And Chris said, look, at the moment, I'm not worried about the money. What I'm worried about is the fact that you did this, that you dragged me into it, that you could do this to someone who's a friend. And Alex Murdaugh, kept promising, I will get you the money back. I will make this as right as I can. The guy left. Chris Wilson left, absolutely fuming. He got some food. He drove back to the office and then found out that Alex Murdaugh had been shot in the head. And he was on his way to hospital. He said he didn't know what to think at that point. He didn't think that Alex was suicidal, but who knows? So all of this is really good evidence of fraud. It is not good evidence of motive for double homicide. It's not. There isn't that link yet. There isn't that nexus where these things come together. Again, the defense said, look, we're not disputing these facts for purposes of this trial, but we're saying it has no bearing on Maggie and Paul's murders. To be honest with you, and the chat said kind of the same thing, it feels like the prosecution are trying the fraud rather than the murders. It feels like they're attacking his character. Look, he stole all of this money. He's a bad guy. He must have done this awful thing as well. And there just isn't that link for me. People are acting like this is a slam dunk case, and it's really not. If you come at it from a point of not guilty on the murders and guilty on the fraud, well, not all fraudsters are murderers, and not all murderers are fraudsters. So where is that link? And what is the judge going to say about this evidence and whether it's going to be coming into the courtroom at all? We are still waiting for this. I know the defence waived their rights or used their right for a speedy trial. And I know that took the prosecution by surprise, which was a good tactic, because the prosecution just come across as they're not ready. These things haven't been processed properly. They don't have the facts, and they don't know how to tie the two crimes together when they have no physical evidence that Alex Murdaugh was there. That's it from this video. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit like and subscribe. Leave me a comment underneath. Let me know your thoughts. I will be doing a couple of other videos rebutting some of the arguments I've seen in the chat, and about Alex Murdaugh and whether you can have empathy for an accused murderer and an accused fraudster. But for now, I'm going to head over to Kurt because he's live and I'm missing it. Please come and join us over there. It's Uncivil Law. He's doing a great job, and he has some really fantastic guests on as and when they can pop on during the day. Thank you so much for being here, and I will speak to you soon.